The lights in St. Gabriel Medical Center did not just hum. They buzzed in Lena Hart's teeth, a faint vibration that settled in her molars and the base of her skull. Air vents sighed overhead. Somewhere behind the walls, a compressor kicked on with a low growl. To most people, it was background noise. To Lena, it felt a little too much like the inside of a metal box in the sky. She told herself it was only air and wires and fluorescent bulbs. Hospital sounds, civilian sounds. Her fingers hidden in the pockets of an oversized white coat curled into her palms until her nails bit skin. Relax, she thought. You are Lena Hart. Intern. Slow. Harmless. Dr. Hart, join us, please. The cluster of white coats parted enough for her to see Dr. Colin Mercer at the head of the rounding team. He stood at the foot of the bed, tablet in hand, posture straight as a ruler. His hair was too perfect for a man who worked nights. His smile looked practiced. Lena stepped in closer, shoulders rounded, head ducked. Yes, Dr. Mercer, she said, eyes on the floor. Residents and students ringed the bed. The patient, a middle-aged man with a fresh abdominal dressing, watched them like they were a show that had wandered into his room. Mercer glanced at the chart, then at Lena. We are discussing Mr. Hargrove's post-operative management after last night's appendectomy, he said. He has a history of mild arrhythmia. In the first 12 hours after surgery, what is your primary biochemical concern? The answer came to Lena as a quick slide of images, a strip of EKG with peaked T waves, lab values tipping into red, a heart muscle twitching out of rhythm. Potassium, magnesium, thresholds, doses, it was basic. But basic was not the role. Her thumb rubbed across the rim of her ID badge, feeling the raised letters of the offshore medical school printed under her name. A school chosen precisely because people like Mercer rolled their eyes when they saw it. She said, letting the sound hang for a beat. I mean his heart, so we should probably keep him on the monitor and maybe check his blood. Mercer stared at her. His eyebrows climbed. Maybe check his blood, he repeated. The corners of a few mouths in the circle twitched. Someone snorted, then swallowed it back. He turned to the group, not to her. You hear that? He asked. Dr. Hart suggests we maybe check some labs. Revolutionary. Write that down. Soft laughter moved through the residence. Lena kept her eyes on her shoes. Her cheeks burned hot. The heat was real. The shame was half performance. It is not about maybes, Mercer said, looking back at her. His voice cooled. Medicine is precision. You know that a drop in potassium can push this man into atrial fibrillation before you finish your coffee. You know you must keep his K above 4, his magnesium above 2, or you should know that if your degree is worth the paper it is printed on. He held out his hand. After a second, she realized he expected her clipboard. She fumbled it free and passed it over. Where was it again? He asked, eyes dropping to her badge. Grenada right. Perhaps the standards are different. He pivoted away and handed the clipboard toward Nora Diaz without looking. Nora, the charge nurse, caught it one-handed. Ms. Diaz, remind pharmacy we need electrolyte bags on standby for bed 12, Mercer said. And Dr. Hart. He did not turn back when he said her name. You are a liability out here today. Go make yourself useful in supply B3. Reorganize the inventory. Count the gauze. Try not to injure yourself. A couple of residents smiled into their sleeves. One of the students looked briefly uncomfortable, then smoothed his face and watched Mercer instead. Yes, sir, Lena said. She let a small tremor creep into her voice. Sorry. Nora's eyes followed her as she stepped back from the circle. The nurse's dark hair was pulled into a tight bun, streaked with silver. She did not smile. She simply held Lena's gaze for an extra second, weighing something, then turned back to the monitors. Lena slipped into the hallway. The sound shifted with each step away from the room. Voices blended into a murmur, then thinned. The taps of shoes and the scrape of wheels faded. What remained was the low, constant hum of the building itself. Air and ducts, water and pipes, electricity and wire. Her feet carried her past doorways of sleeping patients and half-empty coffee cups. Her coat dragged at her shoulders a size too big, sleeves swallowing her hands unless she kept her fingers hooked on the edges of the pockets. At the end of the corridor, a metal door was stenciled with black letters, Supply B3. Someone had taped a note underneath in bright pink marker that read, Knock first or risk getting buried alive. The joke tugged at the corner of Lena's mouth. She reached for the handle. The metal was cool and a little tacky under her fingers, cleaned too many times with too much disinfectant. For a moment she stood there breathing in the mixed smells of bleached stale coffee and the faint ghost of floral perfume. The hum pressed against her eardrum, steady and patient. She opened the door and stepped inside. The overhead light flicked on with a dry pop. As the door latched shut behind her, the noises of the hospital dropped away like someone turning down a dial. Shelves lined the walls of Supply B3 from floor to ceiling. metal ribs stacked with boxes and plastic bins. The air was cooler here, touched with the tang of alcohol wipes, cardboard, and old tape. A single fluorescent tube hummed overhead, sharper than the ones in the hall, as if all its sound had been trapped inside this small room. Lena let the door click shut behind her. For a few seconds she stood in place listening. The distant noise of the hospital was still there, but filtered. No families talking. No shoes. Just a low murmur seeping under the door and the higher insect pitch of electricity above her head. Her shoulders slumped the way they always did when she walked the halls. Then slowly the slump drained away. She straightened one vertebra at a time until her spine stacked into a clean line. The motion was quiet, almost invisible, but it changed the way she occupied the space. The coat that had looked too big in the corridor now seemed like a loose cover thrown over something tight and coiled. She slid her hands out of her pockets and flexed her fingers. Red half-moons from her own nails faded from her palms. On the back of the door, someone had taped an inventory sheet under a strip of cracked plastic. Gauze syringes, sutures, IV sets. Columns of numbers that never quite matched reality. Mercer had meant it as a punishment. A timeout with boxes. Lena looked at the shelves and saw a puzzle. Her eyes moved in quick jumps. She tagged every label, every color code, every expiration date. Her brain filed them without her asking it to. Fine, she murmured under her breath. Work is work. She shrugged out of her coat, folded it once, and laid it over a crate. The scrubs beneath were hospital-issued and unflattering, but they freed her arms. She rolled the sleeves to her elbows. Pale skin, thin scars crossing the heels of her hands, and the inside of her wrists, white lines almost the same color. She started on the glove boxes. Size small, medium, large. Leftovers from different manufacturers mixed together. She could have read the labels. Instead, she gripped each box in turn and felt the weight. 7.9 ounces. 7.5. 8 heavier because someone had opened it and taken a handful. Her fingers judged the difference the way other people judged the weight of a mug or a book. She moved them into neat stacks, largest to smallest higher usage at arm height, rare sizes on the top shelf. Her movements got faster as she worked. Empty cartons flew to a broken-down pile by the door. New ones slid into place in the gaps without her needing to think about it. In the middle of all of it, she paused and closed her eyes. In her mind, the hospital unfolded in clean lines. She saw the map she had studied on her first day stripped of color and furniture. Just corridors, stairwells, shafts, fire doors. The elevators that required staff badges, the ones that did not. The freight elevator that clanked. The laundry chute tucked behind a service room on the north side. The roof access ladder above the west stair. She ran the route as if she were tracing it with a finger. Locker room to stairwell, stairwell to roof, roof to helipad, or locker room to laundry chute to loading dock. She watched tiny imaginary versions of herself move along those lines, switching paths, checking for bottlenecks. Most interns memorized the fastest way to the cafeteria. Her eyes opened. The shelves waited. She moved on to the IV kits. To anyone watching, it would have looked like chaos moving into order. To her, it felt like static draining out of her muscles. The tiny frustrations of the hallway, the forced stumbles and stammers bled out with every box she aligned. A roll of silk tape slipped off the edge of a shelf. Her right hand snapped out and caught it at her hip without effort. The motion was smooth, no wasted angle. Muscle memory. For a moment she felt the ghost of leather in her grip instead of cardboard. The shape of a rifle sling, the weight of metal and polymer. A dry wind in her face. She squeezed her hand until the tape creaked, then set it down. On the third shelf, halfway down, she saw the sutures. They sat in a gray plastic bin, half-sorted foil envelopes bent, where someone had shoved them in. She pulled the bin out and lowered it onto a waist-high shelf. Names and numbers ran across the labels. Vicryl, Proline, Monocryl, 30, 40, 50. Her fingertips traced the print. The friction of paper under skin, the faint ridges of embossed lot numbers. Heat rose in her chest before she understood why. In the tent, the light was not white, but orange. Canvas glowed overhead. The air tasted like burned rubber and copper. The hum was from a generator that coughed every few seconds, making the lamp over the table stutter. The man on the table was barely older than a teenager, boots still on one foot, the other leg a mangled stump below the knee. Blood slicked the floor sticky against her boots. "Je-12," a voice snapped close to her ear. "He is crashing." She had both hands in the wound deep enough that her forearms were wet. The femoral artery had snapped back into the meat of the thigh. Every time the boy's heart pumped, a fresh surge of blood pushed at her fingers, hot and desperate. She dug deeper until her fingertips found the vessel slippery and thick, beating against her touch. She pinched it hard. The spray stopped. The tent seemed to exhale. "I have it," she said, voice low. So, there were no vascular clamps. The last shipment had gone somewhere else. They used what they had. Bent hemostats, fishing line, whatever would hold long enough to get the boy on a truck. The edges of the wound blurred. Her own breath sounded loud in her ears, too loud. Lena jerked her hand back from the bin. A foil packet of sutures slid off and skidded to the floor, followed by another, then a cascade. Plastic crackled and echoed in the small room. The tent vanished. St. Gabriel came back in a rush of cool air and chemical smell. Her heart hammered. Sweat prickled between her shoulder blades. For a moment, the walls felt an inch closer than they had been. She crouched and began to gather the fallen packets. They rattled against each other in her hands. "Not here," she whispered, barely making a sound. "Not now." She set the bin on the shelf a little more gently than before. On the opposite wall, next to a case of saline, her backpack sat, where she had stashed it that morning. Plain black canvas. Zipper pulls wrapped in quiet tape so they would not jingle. She had never taken it more than 10 feet from her since she arrived at St. Gabriel. She crossed to it, unzipped the outer pocket, and took out a small orange bottle. No label, no pharmacy sticker, just plastic mat and anonymous. She shook a single pill into her palm and studied it for a second. Beta blocker. Enough to press her heart rate down, blunt the spike of adrenaline that never seemed to leave her entirely alone. "Lower," she said quietly to herself. "Slow it down." She tipped her head back and swallowed it dry. It scraped in her throat. She coughed once, then wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. The hum from the light seemed to lower a fraction as the pill sat in her stomach. She could not feel the drug yet, but the act of taking it settled something. She zipped the bag and put it back, aligning it with the edge of the shelf without thinking. Then she went back to work. She stacked saline bags by size, labeled a tray of syringes that had been left open, put the most commonly stolen items on the highest shelves. Her hands moved faster. She did not need to pretend clumsiness in here. No one was watching. Minutes passed in a rhythm of sliding cardboard, the crinkle of plastic, and the occasional click of her tongue when she found something out of place. She was halfway through organizing the wound care supplies when the floor shivered. It was small at first, a tremor through the soles of her shoes. The metal shelving gave a tiny rattle. A box of gauze shifted on its own and pressed against her wrist. The hum of the building rose into a deeper note. It felt like pressure behind her eyes. Then came the sound. A heavy, distant thump muffled by concrete and distance, like someone slamming a colossal door somewhere below the city. The overhead light flickered twice off, then on shadows jumping on the walls. Lena went still. Her body did something before her mind named it. Her knees bent a little, her weight dropped toward the floor, ready to move. Her brain tagged the vibration and filed it with others she had felt. Not a dropped bed, not a slammed cart, not an MRI magnet spinning up. Fuel, contained space, high yield. An explosion. The silence after it was thin and brittle. Then the intercom crackled to life. The soft electronic tone that usually preceded a mundane announcement sounded strained a fraction too loud. "Attention all staff, Huh? We from STEM," the operator's voice said. The woman on the other end usually sounded bored. Now her words were tight. "Code triage external. Major incident reported on Interstate 76 bridge. All available trauma personnel to emergency department immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." The speaker hissed and clicked off. The light hummed, the boxes waited. The air in the closet felt slightly different charged. Lena stood alone between the shelves, listening to the building wake up. For a heartbeat, Lena did not move. "Code triage external." The words settled into the quiet of Supply B3 like dust after a blast. Out in the corridors, the murmur thickened. Feet started to run. A cart squealed as someone yanked it around a corner. Somewhere far off, a door slammed again and again as people pushed through it. Her first thought was simple and drilled in. "Stay put. You were told to stay out of the way." Her second thought arrived on top of it, sharp and undeniable. "Mass casualty. They will not be enough." Her pulse had already climbed, drug or not. She could feel each beat in the soft skin under her jaw. "You are an intern," she told herself under her breath. "You are slow. You are safe." Her body did not listen. She grabbed her white coat from the crate, shook it out, and shrugged back into it. The fabric felt heavier than before. She checked automatically that her ID badge was clipped on straight, that the name and the out-of-country medical school were visible and unremarkable. Her hand brushed the backpack. For a second, she considered taking it. Habit pushed one way. Cover pushed the other. An intern running toward the emergency department with a tactical go bag would be wrong in a way that even Mercer could see. She left it on the shelf exactly parallel to the edge. The hallway outside Supply B3 had transformed in the handful of seconds she had been listening. A tech sprinted past with an empty stretcher hair escaping her ponytail. A respiratory therapist hustled the other direction, lugging a ventilator that beeped with each jostle. Voices bounced along the walls overlapping. Some kind of pileup on the bridge, I heard. They said tanker on the scanner. Did you hear fuel tanker? Where is Dr. Mercer? Lena merged into the flow without pushing. She kept her shoulders drawn in head down, letting the tide carry her toward the core of the hospital. Her steps were measured just quicker than a walk, far slower than she wanted. Every doorway she passed, she marked. Stairwell, supply, staff lounge, code cart. As she approached the main corridor that fed into the emergency department, the smell hit first. Antiseptic could not keep up with the volume of people and the fresh metal edge of blood. The air tasted thicker. The hum of the building had changed again, layered with alarm tones and shouted names. The automatic doors to the ER slid open as a nurse in green scrubs shouldered through. Lena stepped in behind her. The room that had felt busy earlier in the morning now looked like a camera frame packed to bursting. Every bay was occupied or being prepped. Extra gurneys lined the center aisle, some still empty, some already loaded. The nurse's station was buried in forms and half-empty coffee cups, the monitors above it flashing vital signs that leaned toward red. The noise was a wall. People talking over each other, the high note of monitors, the wet sound of someone coughing hard and failing to clear their lungs. On a television bolted near the ceiling, the usual daytime chatter had been replaced by a local news anchor in a serious suit. Behind her, a helicopter feed showed Interstate 76 curled over the river like a broken rib. A section of the bridge had dropped out, leaving a gap. Smoke from a burning truck rose thick and black, smearing the sky. A caption along the bottom of the screen scrolled, "Breaking collapse on I-76, bridge multiple vehicles involved possible fuel tanker." In one clip from earlier coverage, Governor Elias Ward stood at a podium with the same bridge behind him, smiling as he cut a ribbon with a pair of oversized scissors. The sound on the television was muted, but Lena could read the anchor's lips as she said the words, "mass casualty." "Move those stretchers, we need room at the doors." Nora's voice cut through the noise. The charge nurse stood in the center of the chaos, short and solid, her hair already fraying from its bun. A stethoscope hung crooked around her neck. Her cheeks were flushed. She pointed with a pen at an orderly, then at a gurney that had been parked sideways across the flow. "Not there, against the wall. Think about where you stand." The doors at the ambulance bay slid open with a hiss. Cold air pushed in, carrying the smell of exhaust and something darker. The first paramedics came through, backs bowed over their patients. The gurney in front held a woman in her 30s, clothes charred in patches, skin blistered red and white up one side of her face and neck. Her eyes were wide and glassy. The sound coming out of her throat was thin and high, halfway between a scream and a whistle. 34-year-old female front seat passenger tanker blew behind them, flash burns, possible inhalation. Injury vitals en route were. The paramedic rattled off numbers as they moved. Nora steered them toward a bay, already calling for respiratory. Lena stood pressed against the wall near the entrance, out of the way, but close enough to see everything. Another stretcher rolled in. This time it held a man with his shirt cut away, chest rising and falling in an uneven pattern. One side lagged behind the other. Every breath made a clicking sound. His left ribs were sunken in the skin above them, pulling in and out in a rhythm opposite his lungs. Flail chest, Lena's mind supplied. Segmental fractures, paradoxical movement. The medic with him was panting. Driver of a pickup hit the guardrail when he saw the gap. No airbag steering wheel impact chest trauma. Maybe spinal BP dropping pulses weak in all extremities. We need a chest tube right now. The words stacked in her head, forming a picture that was almost clean enough to touch. Tube placement, ventilation strategy, pain control, blood type. She shifted her gaze to the next body coming through the doors. He did not scream. He did not moan. He lay very still, eyes half open, lips slightly parted. His skin was too pale under the grime, a thin sheen of sweat along his hairline. Both hands were pressed low to his abdomen, fingers curling in as if he were trying to hold something inside. Male unknown age, no ID, was in the back of a sedan, extricated after 20 minutes seat in front of him, folded back into his legs. The paramedic's voice wavered once, but he kept talking. BP on scene was 90/60, dropped to 80/40. En route. Heart rate 130, abdomen rigid. Probable internal bleeding, pupils sluggish. We have one line in, but it keeps blowing. We are running out of veins. The man blinked once slow. His lips moved. No sound came out. He is the one, Lena thought. His silence is louder than the others. The screaming woman was a siren. Everyone heard her. The man with the broken chest made the monitors wail. The silent ones died if no one watched them. Lena took a step forward without meaning to, drawn toward the stretcher with the pale man. She got as far as the wheel before a familiar voice cracked through the air. Dr. Hart. Mercer stood 3 bays down, hands already in gloves, an N95 mask hanging loose around his neck. His hair was still perfect. His eyes were not. They were too wide. He jerked his chin toward the waiting room doors. Out here is not your playground. I told you to stay off the trauma floor. Go triage the walking wounded. Sprains, cuts, headaches. Color in the little boxes. Do not come near my critical patients." He did not wait for her answer. A nurse was calling his name from the bed where the burned woman lay thrashing her head back and forth. "Doctor, her sats are dropping. I cannot get a seal. We need intubation." Mercer spun away, reaching for a laryngoscope. The paramedic at the pale man's side looked at Lena in passing desperation plain in his eyes. "Doc, his pressure is in the gutter. If we do not get him somewhere now, he's gone." Lena opened her mouth. A dozen phrases collided there. Chest fast, ultrasound, massive transfusion, right now. None of them fit the mouth of the slow intern she had been all morning. Her teeth clicked shut. She nodded instead, a quick, jerky motion that looked like an apology. "Somebody will take him," she said, voice soft. The lie tasted like tin. She stepped back toward the edge of the hallway, letting another stretcher slide past. Her hands curled again inside her sleeves, fingernails biting into her palms until pain cleared the blur at the edge of her vision. Patients kept coming. A bus driver, still in his uniform, face gray under streaks of soot. A teenage girl whose left leg was twisted at an angle that made even the seasoned nurse pushing her wince. A child with a bloody nose and two big eyes clinging to the arm of a stranger. Dr. Jonah Price stood at the foot of the flail-chest patient's bed, his blonde hair damp at the temples. His hands shook as he fumbled with a chest tube tray, the sterile drape sticking to his gloves. "I have never done this on my own," he said to no one in particular, voice too high. Nora heard him anyway. "You are not on your own," she snapped. "You have a room full of people. Focus." Lena watched Jonah's fingers as he tried to thread the tube into the side of the man's chest. She could see the line of the ribs under skin, the exact space where the tube needed to go. 7th intercostal mid-axillary, angle of insertion, the slight twist required to follow the curve of the rib. His hand slipped, the tube bent. The monitor above the bed chirped faster. Lena inhaled through her nose, slow and deliberate, then let the air out. She forced herself to step away from the bay. Her shoes stuck slightly to a patch of drying blood on the floor before releasing with a faint pull. At the entrance to the waiting room, a volunteer in a blue vest was trying to hand out clipboards to a cluster of dazed people slumped in chairs. Their clothes were streaked with ash and streaks of white from dried fire extinguisher foam. Some held towels to their arms or heads. Some just stared at the television. Lena walked toward them because that was what she had been told to do. Her ears kept feeding her the sounds from behind her. Nora calling for more saline. The hiss of oxygen. Mercer's voice saying, "Give me suction, I cannot see anything." The burned woman's keening slowly turning into a hoarse rattle. She reached the threshold of the waiting area and stopped just inside it. From here she could see both worlds, the overflow of the walking wounded and the sharp light of the trauma bays. The man with the rigid abdomen disappeared behind a curtain as someone finally wheeled his stretcher out of the main aisle. Her hands itched. The pill in her stomach had begun to work, shaving the top off her heart rate. Her body felt out of sync with the urgency on the other side of the doors. Lena closed her eyes for half a second. In the darkness behind her lids, she saw the bridge again, the gap in the concrete, the plume of black smoke rising into the sky. When she opened them, Nora was looking her way from the nurse's station. The nurse's face was tight, jaw set. Their eyes met. Nora gave the smallest shake of her head, frustration and warning wrapped into one. Lena lifted a clipboard from the volunteer stack and forced her fingers to hold it loosely. She began to write names. The first name she wrote was unknown. The man in front of her spoke with a flat voice as if the words did not belong to him. "I was driving home, there was smoke, then nothing. My head hurts, that is all." Blood had dried in a dark fan along his hairline. His pupils were equal. His hands did not shake. He smelled like burned plastic. Lena asked the scripted questions. Any numbness? Any trouble breathing? Any chest pain? Her pen moved through the triage boxes, ticking the safe answers, marking him as stable. Behind her, the ER kept swelling. 2 more ambulances arrived. A small boy wailed as someone tried to tape gauze to his forehead. The television showed the same looping footage of the broken bridge. Her hand paused over the last box on the form. She left it blank for a second, then checked low priority and handed the clipboard back. "Sit there," she said gently. "If you feel worse, if you feel dizzy or sick to your stomach, tell someone." He nodded and moved to an empty chair, one of many. The waiting room smelled like sweat and disinfectant and the faint sugary trace of a vending machine snack whose wrapper lay crumpled on the floor. The next patient in line did not step forward. Instead, everyone in the waiting room looked past her toward the double doors that led to the ambulance bay. The air changed before Lena heard anything. Heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the volunteer with the blue vest straightened. Then the doors to the ER opened with a rush and let in a slice of outside cold. Two men in dark suits pushed through first, their jackets stretching around shoulder holsters. Wires coiled under their collars toward earpieces. Their faces were set in a look that was not quite fear and not quite calm, something hard and trained. "Clear the hallway," one of them shouted. "Move these people back. We need the main bay clear now." He was not hospital staff. He did not know or care about the usual flow. He used his body like a plow, steering a rolling monitor cart out of his path, barely glancing at the nurse who protested. Behind him came a stretcher that looked different from the others, without Lena being able to say why at first. It was the way everyone else reacted. The way Nora stopped in the middle of giving an order and swore under her breath. The way Mercer's head snapped toward the doors as if yanked on a string. The man on the stretcher wore what was left of a dark suit and a white dress shirt turned brown and gray with soot. A tie lay loose across his chest, half melted. A long piece of rusted metal speared out of his upper abdomen, angling up toward his right shoulder. The bar vibrated with each shallow breath, the motion obscene. For a moment, Lena only saw the metal. It was a strip of guardrail or rebar, jagged at the edges. Orange and brown rust stained the clean blue of the sheets under it. Then her mind registered the face. She had seen it on the muted television, always with better lighting and a confident smile. The strong jaw, the sweep of silver hair, the politician's tan. "That is Governor Ward," someone near the nurse's station whispered a little too loudly. The word governor rippled through the room. A paramedic swallowed hard and kept moving. Nora snapped out of her freeze. She stepped to the side of the stretcher, shoulder brushing one of the suits. "Trauma 1, as she said. Not Trauma 3, Trauma 1. It is closest to the doors and the OR elevators." "We need security," the suit on the right said. "We need this whole section locked down. No cameras, no press in or out." "You need him alive first," Nora shot back. The stretcher swung toward Trauma Bay 1. Nurses peeled off from other tasks, drawn to the center of gravity. Lena stood at the edge of the waiting room, clipboard held loosely now. The walking wounded blurred at the edges of her vision. All her focus honed in on the bar of metal and the pattern of blood around it. Entry point was just below the sternum, a little right of midline. The angle was steep, pointed up and back toward the spine. The metal did not rise and fall with each breath the way it would if it had gone through the lung alone. She tracked it in her head, the invisible path inside flesh. Past the liver dome near the diaphragm, brushing the bottom of the heart. At that angle, depth, and position, it kissed the great vein that returned blood from the lower body. The inferior vena cava, soft-walled, high flow. The metal was a plug. Take out the plug and the hole opens. Her mouth went dry. She could hear the governor's heart in the bleed of the monitor as the stretcher entered the bay, a steady but rapid rhythm. Mercer strode in after them, tugging his mask up over his nose, snapping on a fresh pair of gloves. "What have we got?" he called, voice pitched to Carrie. The lead paramedic stood at the head of the stretcher, sweat tracking lines through the soot on his forehead. "Male, 58, unrestrained driver vehicle went over the partial collapse. Front end, dropped hard. Metal from the guardrail impaled him en route down. We had to cut it on scene, had no time. He has been hypotensive since. BP is 60/30 on pressure bag and fluids wide open. Heart rate 140. He has had 6 of morphine, nothing more." "Did you move the bar at all?" Mercer asked. "We tried not to," the medic said. He glanced at the metal gilt flickering in his eyes. "It shifted when we cut it. There was a period of heavy bleeding, then it settled." Settled. Lena could see the meaning of that word. Mercer leaned over the wound, eyes narrowing. Blood seeped around the edges of the metal in a slow ooze, for now soaking the dressing that the medics had taped into place. His hands hovered, not touching. "Ew. We need imaging," he said. "I want a CT of his chest and abdomen before we do anything. I am not cutting blind on the governor of Pennsylvania." "We cannot move him like this," Nora said. She checked the numbers on the monitor, then checked the governor's pupils, pulling back one eyelid with her thumb. "His pressure is already in the basement. You roll him to CT and hit one bump, and he is empty before you get there." "We cannot guess inside his belly," Mercer snapped. "Not on him, not with a foreign body like this. We move him carefully, we pad the bar, we go slow." "Slow is not his friend right now," Nora said. The words came out between her teeth. The suits hovered at the edges of the bay, useless and anxious. "What is the risk if we move him?" one asked. His tone tried to be neutral and failed. Nora did not look at him. "He bleeds to death in the hallway," she said. "That is the risk." The suit swallowed. Mercer straightened. "I will not assume a trajectory on an object we cannot see," he said. "The liability if something goes wrong is astronomical. We do it by the book, we get imaging, then we plan." In the corridor, a gurney squeaked. Another patient groaned. The ER did not pause to listen to this argument, but the people in trauma, one felt the tension like a rope pulled tight. Lena hovered just outside the open doorway, thumb pressed against the edge of her clipboard so hard the plastic creaked. In her head, She ran the picture again, the metal bar, the path of least resistance, the density of structures. Bone deflected, vessels did not. The inferior vena cava sat like a soft, vulnerable tunnel to the right of the spine. She saw it tear as the metal shifted, saw the sudden wash of dark blood into the abdominal cavity, saw the team's hands turning slick and useless. "Do not move him," she whispered. The words barely left her mouth. No one in the room heard. Mercer made his decision. "Get transport in here," so he said. "We go to CT now. Pat around the bar so it does not torque. Move him on my count. 1 unit of O negative on a pressure bag. Keep it running. Nora, you come with me." Nora's jaw tightened. Her eyes flicked to the monitor again, then to the governor's face, then to the iron bar. "You are making a mistake," she said quietly. "If you cannot support the plan, you can step aside, Mercer replied, the edge in his voice cut. Nora did not step aside. She took her place at the head of the bed, her hands on the governor's shoulders, bracing. Orderlies slid a backboard under the sheet as gently as they could. Someone taped foam blocks around the protruding metal, trying to stabilize it. The monitor beeped each tone a fraction closer together. "On 3, Mercer said. 1, 2, 3. They moved as a unit, lifting and pivoting the stretcher toward the door. The metal bar wobbled, once the foam around it rustling. The first bump came at the threshold where the floor in Trauma 1 dipped a little to meet the main hallway. The kind of unevenness that no one noticed on a normal day. The stretcher wheels clacked over it. The bar jerked only a fraction of an inch. The monitor screamed. The flat, drawn-out tone cut through every other sound. The waveform on the screen collapsed into a straight line punctuated by small electronic teeth. "Pressure is gone," a nurse called. Her voice went thin. Blood that had been oozing around the wounds surged. It poured out in a red sheet, soaking the pads, then pouring over the side rails of the stretcher. It hit the floor in a heavy splash. Someone's shoe slid a little in it. "Get him back in the bay," Nora shouted. Now, take him back." Mercer froze in the doorway, eyes locked on the field of red spreading under his hands. For a heartbeat, he did not move. An alarm began to chirp from the pump that had been pushing fluids. It was trying to push into a vessel that was no longer there. "You tore it," Nora said. Her voice was low and furious. "I told you." In Bay 2, Dr. Jonah Price's patient started to cough pink foam. Jonah fumbled the suction catheter, almost dropping it. The ER felt suddenly smaller. The air itself seemed to thicken. Lena stood in the hallway just outside the arc of blood on the floor, her feet planted. One man on a stretcher chest rising in ragged gasps, drowning in his own lips. Another pale and still, his lifeblood spilling fast. Her fingers tightened around the plastic of the clipboard until it creaked in protest. Her body leaned forward a fraction as if something inside her had shifted its weight. The clipboard cracked first. Plastic snapped where her grip had bent it. The sound was small under the shriek of the monitor, but it was enough. Lena looked down at the white half-moon her fingers had pressed into the edge, then let the board fall. It hit the floor with a flat clap. A few heads turned by reflex. The world narrowed. The waiting room and its low groans slid to the edges. The fluorescent glare of the trauma bays brightened. The smell of iron thickened. Her ears dropped every sound except 3. The monotone from the governor's monitor. The wet splash of blood on tile. Jonah sang somewhere to her right. "I cannot see anything, it is all blood." In the back of her mind, the generator in the tent coughed once, then steadied. Men shouted. Someone somewhere called for more hands. "You are Lena Hart, slow, safe." Something in her answered with an older name. "Move." She stepped through the line of tape on the floor that marked family from staff. No one stopped her. Everyone was looking at the stretcher, at the red flood beneath it. Nora had both hands on the governor's chest now, not compressing yet, just bracing. Mercer still stood at the side, gloved hands held in the air, fingers spread and eyes fixed on the wound. "Get me a crash cart," he said. The words did not match his stance. They hung in the air thin. Someone ran for the cart. Someone else slipped in the blood, caught themselves on a bedrail. The suits pressed back against the wall shoes, leaving streaks along the edge of the spreading pool. Lena walked straight toward the stretcher. The hum of the building faded to a low throb behind her heartbeat. "Dr. Hart out," Mercer snapped when he saw her. His voice tried to regain authority and fell short. "You do not belong in here. This is above your level. Go back to—" She put her hand on his chest and shoved. The move was not violent, but it was precise. She caught him just above the solar plexus at the point that would send him stumbling without making it look like a fight. His weight shifted back. One shoe slid in blood. He had to grab for the rail of the neighboring bed to keep from going down. The room drew in a breath. "What are you doing?" he gasped. "Gloves," Lena said. Her voice did not sound like it had in the hallway. It was lower. The consonants landed harder. There was no tremor in it now. She held her hands out to the scrub nurse at the foot of the bed. The nurse stared at her for a half-second, eyes tracking from Lena's intern badge to the governor's face, then to the blood. The monitor screamed again, a long, unbroken tone. The nurse slapped a pair of gloves into Lena's hands. Mercer took a step back toward the bed, anger flushing up his neck. "Security?" he barked. "Get her out of my—" "Doctor." One of the suits cut in, voice cracking. "He is the governor of—" "Quiet," Lena said. She did not look up. It was not a shout. The word still carried. It rode on something older than rank. "Ms. Diaz," she said, eyes on the wound. "If he comes within 3 feet of this bed, you stop him." Nora's head turned. For a fraction of a second, surprise flickered across her face. Then she stepped between Mercer and the stretcher, shoulders squared. "Do not take another step, Colin," she said. "You will track blood into my other bays." There was more than one kind of protection in the sentence. Lena snapped the gloves into place. Powder kissed her wrists. She planted one knee onto the blood-slick floor, ignoring the cold soak creeping into her scrub pants. "Clamp," she said, holding out her hand. The instrument the nurse put into her palm was a regular hemostat straight designed for smaller jobs. It would not reach where she needed it. Not the way it was. She set it down on the stainless steel edge of the bed and pressed. The handles screamed against the metal as she bent them slow at first, then with a quick, concentrated push. The shaft bowed into a gentle curve, just enough to shape it around an unseen tube. Her fingers knew the amount of force needed, the way they knew the pull of a knot. Blood pumped over her gloves from the wound. It was not an arterial spray, not now. The metal still blocked the worst of it. For another few seconds. "Cut the dressings away," she said. A nurse snipped the soaked gauze with trauma shears, peeling them back. For an instant, the full entry wound showed. Torn flesh, burned fabric, a rim of shredded muscle clinging to the bar. "Do not touch the metal again," Lena said. "It stays where it is." She did not wait for an answer. She opened her right hand finger splayed and plunged it into the governor's abdomen around the bar. Heat swallowed her up to the wrist. Blood and fluid closed around her skin, thick and slick. The smell of iron filled her nose. The governor's body twitched once under her arm. Someone made a small sound behind her. A nurse or one of the suits. "She cannot see anything," Mercer said. He sounded stunned. "She is blind in there." Lena tuned him out. In the tent there had been no light sometimes. The generator had failed, or the bulb had blown, or the wind had rattled the canvas, until shadows rolled across everything. She had learned the map of the human body with her hands then. Now she ran that map again. Fingers brushed the smooth dome of the liver, the hard line of a rib. She felt the metal shaft cold against the pads of her fingers, then slid past it deeper. Behind bone and organ near the spine there was a pulse. Not the fast, frantic thrum of an artery, but a big, low rush. It shuddered through the soft wall of a vessel that should not have been exposed. She moved her fingertips along it, following the damage. There. A tear where something should have been whole. The edges fluttered with each beat. Her left hand reached for the bent clamp, without her eyes leaving the wound. The nurse put it into her palm. The metal was firm and reassuring. "Drop his head of bed by 10 degrees, she said. "I want blood away from his brain and toward his core." Nora nodded and signaled. The motor under the bed whirred, lowering the head a little. Lena slid the curved clamp past her fingers, feeling for the far edge of the vein. The vessel tried to squirm away, soft and slippery. She wedged the back of her hand against the bar for leverage and used the angle of the curve to sweep under it. For one heartbeat, the clamp floated in warm dark. Then the side of it scraped along the back of the vein. She eased it into position, hearing the faint jingle of the chain that connected its handles. "Ready," she said under her breath, more to herself than anyone. She tasted metal on her tongue. She squeezed. The clamp clicked shut. The gush of blood slowed, not gone but less. Enough. "Pressure is climbing phase," the anesthesiologist said in a wondering tone. 70 over 40, 80. The monitor's flat scream hiccuped, then picked up a wavering rhythm. Lena let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. It fogged her mask for a second before the air sucked it away. "Suction," she said. The nurse brought the tube in, the tip whining as it cleared the pooled blood from around her hand. Red disappeared into the canister in swirling eddies. With the field a fraction clearer, she could work. 4-O-proline on a double-armed needle, she said. "That is not what we use on vena cava," Mercer started. His voice sounded far away, even though he stood only a few feet back, blocked by Nora's shoulder. "It is what I use," Lena replied. The scrub tech slapped the suture into her left hand. She took it between her fingers, felt the weight and flex of the needle. Her right hand held the clamp steady, knuckles braced against the metal bar. She did not try to see the tear. She felt where the edges met under her fingertips and drove the needle through by touch. Biting into the far wall, pulling through, crossing back into the near wall. Her wrists moved in small arcs. The pattern formed itself the same looping locking stitch she had used 100 times in places no one in this room would ever see. Needle in, pull, tighten, lock. The world outside the 6 inches of space around her hands blurred. She no longer heard the suits. She barely heard Nora calling out new blood pressures. A faint part of her registered Jonah cursing under his breath in the neighboring bay. Her hands kept moving. In the tent, they had called her Threader because of this, because she could sew a vessel together before the rest of the team had finished setting up the next tray. 30 seconds, for almost there, she murmured. She laid down the last turn of the stitch, tied it off with 3 quick, secure throws, and set the needle back into the tray. The clamp, she said. She eased the pressure on the handles and opened the jaws a little, ready to snap it closed again if the repair failed. The blood that seeped out now was a slow ooze, no longer a pressed spray. "It is holding," the anesthesiologist said. His voice had an edge of awe. "BP 90/60 and rising, heart rate down to 120. "Good," Lena said. She handed the clamp back to the scrub nurse. Her arms felt heavy only once she took them out of the governor's abdomen. Air hit her skin. Goosebumps prickled along her forearms where blood cooled. "Pack the cavity lightly for now," she said. "We will come back. For the moment, he is not dying." She stepped backward away from the bed. The blood on the floor grabbed at her shoes. She peeled her soles free one at a time. Her head turned toward Bay 2. Jonah stood frozen, laryngoscope in hand. The burned woman's mouth hung open under his bright light. Her tongue and throat looked raw, swelling in slow motion. Each attempt at a breath pulled her chest inward more than her lungs could answer. The monitor at her head flashed numbers in red. The oxygen saturation dipped into the 60s. "I cannot see the cords," Jonah said. His voice broke. "Everything is swollen. I keep hitting the back wall. She is going to arrest." "Listen to me," a respiratory therapist said. "Bag between attempts. Do not keep her without air." "We are bagging into her stomach," Jonah whispered. The bag in his hands squeaked, his grip unsteady. "I am filling her stomach, not her lungs. I am making it worse." Lena's body moved before the thought fully formed. She crossed the space between the bays in a few long steps. Blood smeared under her shoes. She caught the edge of the divider curtain with one gloved hand, swung around it, and into the cramped rectangle of Bay 2. "Stop," she said. Jonah looked up, startled. Sweat had darkened the collar of his scrubs. His eyes were wide pupils blown. "I have her," Lena said. "Step back." "You cannot just take over," he said. There was fear in the protest, not arrogance. "You are shaking," she said. "You need to breathe. Stand by the meds and be ready." He hesitated, then moved aside. The bag valve mask hung slack in his fingers. Lena took the woman's chin in one hand and felt the rubbery give of burned skin. The smell of scorched hair and synthetic fabric hit her. Her other hand slid to the front of the neck. Thyroid cartilage. Cricoid cartilage. The soft dip of the membrane between. The landmarks were swollen but still there. "We will not get a tube from above," she said calmly. "We go from the front." The respiratory therapist stared at her. "A surgical airway, he said. "You are an intern." "Scalpel," Lena said. The word came out with the weight of a rank that did not appear on her ID. The scrub nurse from Trauma 1 had followed her without thinking. Now she held out a blade. Lena took it. She did not make a long, hesitant cut. She let the point of the blade bite into the thin strip of tissue between the cartilages, then dragged it through in a short, firm line. Air hissed out through the new opening hot against her wrist. 6.0 tube, she said. A narrow endotracheal tube slid into her empty hand. She guided it straight through the slit, feeling the rings of the trachea under her fingers. No vocal cords, no tongue in the way. The bag clicked onto the end of the tube. The therapist squeezed. The woman's chest rose in a full, clean rise for the first time since she had arrived. Lena bent and pressed her ear close, listening on both sides. "Breath sounds equal, no gurgle in the stomach." "Breath in both lungs," she said. "Secure the tube. Start her on 100%, then titrate down." The monitor over the bed chimed as the oxygen saturation climbed out of the danger zone. 62, 70, 80. The room around her slowly came back into focus. Jonah stood at the foot of the bed, staring at the improvised airway with his mouth slightly open. Nora watched from the gap between curtains, one hand still gloved, streaked with the governor's blood. On the other side of the thin wall, the beeping in Trauma 1 had settled into something regular. The hum of the building returned a low bass under the sharper sounds. Lena straightened. Her chest rose and fell faster than normal, but her hands were steady. She looked from the governor's bay to the burned woman's bay, and then down the line of stretchers crowding the central aisle. "Next," she said. The word left her mouth and hung there. No one argued. The ER shifted around that single syllable like a crowd adjusting to a new center of gravity. For 3 hours, St. Gabriel stopped feeling like a hospital and became something else. A field. A forward line. A place where the only rule that mattered was who could keep blood where it belonged. The next patient came without waiting for permission. A man in a construction vest, his orange stripes blackened at the edges, lay on a stretcher that sagged under his weight. His eyes were half-closed, teeth grit. His legs were twisted inward at an angle that bodies did not choose on their own. Crushed pelvis, Nora called as they wheeled him to an open patch of floor near a wall. There were no bays left. Curtains could not contain the overflow. He went down with a piece of bridge. The fire crew dug him out under concrete. A paramedic held a folded towel tight to the man's groin. Blood seeped through in thick pulses. "We cannot find pulses in his feet, Hawashit," the medic said. His voice shook. "He keeps trying to pass out." Lena stepped to the side of the stretcher. The man tried to lift his head and failed. "Sir, I am Dr. Hart," she said. The lie of the title felt unimportant in that moment. "Your name?" "Vic," he ground out. "Vic Ramos." "Vic, I need you to stay with me," she said. "Your pelvis is broken in more than one place. It is like a broken ring. If we do not close the ring, you will bleed into your own bones." He stared at her, not understanding but hearing the tone. "We do not have an external fixator in the room," a resident said behind her. Someone started to say they would call ortho. Lena was already reaching for a folded sheet at the foot of the stretcher. "We have this," she said. She slid the sheet under Vic's hips, with Nora's help rolling him as little as they could without making him scream. His breath hissed between his teeth, sweat popping out on his forehead. I know, she said the words low and even. "On 3, we pull." She planted one foot against the nearest stretcher wheel, braced her weight, and pulled the ends of the sheet in opposite directions, cinching it tight across his pelvis. The fabric creaked. Vic shouted once guttural, then bit it off. The improvised belt drew his hip bones inward, closing the shattered circle. Blood flow changed under her hands. The pulse under the towel slowed a fraction. "Again," she said. Nora grabbed the other side of the sheet. Together they pulled until the knot in the middle dug into Vic's flesh. "Hold it there," Lena said. She tied the ends off in a quick, secure knot and checked his leg pulses again. Faint, present. "Get him ready for OR when they come begging for cases," she told the hovering resident. "He can wait 30 minutes now. He could not before." She moved on. A child arrived next. He could not have been more than 8. His T-shirt clung to his chest, soaked where someone had pressed a bandage that no longer held. His face was pale lashes dark against his skin. Each breath was shallow. There was a subtle fullness to the space between his heart and the front of his ribs. "We think it is cardiac contusion, Kate," the pediatric resident said. His voice was steady, but his hands were not. "His heart sounds are muffled. The ultrasound is down. It crashed 10 minutes ago, and we cannot get it up again." "Tamponade," Lena said under her breath. Fluid in the sac around the heart. The muscle squeezed but had nowhere to go. The blood had no room to move. If it built up much more, his heart would squeeze itself to a stop. "We can transfer him upstairs, Vas," the resident said. He already sounded behind as if chasing his own plan. "Stairs cost time," Lena said. "Needle." They stared at her. "You cannot do this blind, Conch," the resident said. "Pericardiocentesis without imaging is—" 6-inch spinal needle, she said louder. "Right now." Nora was already digging in a tray eyes on the boy's chest. She handed Lena the needle, long and thin silver gleaming under the harsh lights. Lena placed her left hand flat on the boy's sternum and felt for the borders of bone. She slid her fingers down to the soft point just under the tip, where the ribs ended and the cartilage began. She whispered more to the boy than to anyone else. "I'm going to give your heart some room, okay?" His eyes flicked toward her unfocused. She slipped the needle under her own fingertips, aiming toward his left shoulder. The angle had been drilled into her bones long ago. Low, careful sweeping under the ribs, not through them. She advanced until she felt the slight give of the pericardial sac, that thin, slick membrane that held his heart. She drew back on the syringe. At first, nothing. Then a dark, viscous stream filled the barrel. Blood that did not move the way it should. Blood that had been trapped. The cardiac monitor, which had been showing a narrow, high-peaked beat, widened. The pressure trace climbed. "BP is coming up, Jane," the pediatric resident said, disbelief clear. Heart rate down to 110. Lena withdrew the needle, a fraction adjusted, drew off a little more. When she stopped, the rhythm on the monitor looked almost like one she would see on a routine morning instead of during a disaster. "Get him a bed and PICU," she said, "and somebody fix that ultrasound." She did not wait for an answer. Her body had already turned toward the next shout. Time blurred. She inserted chest tubes one after another, feeling ribs and inner spaces under gloved fingers. In one bay, she guided a tube into the left chest of a woman whose lung had collapsed, listening for the rush of air that meant she had opened a path. In another, she reduced a dislocated shoulder by placing a knee on the side of the bed and using her whole body as leverage while the patient grunted and then sighed when the joint slid back home. She ordered blood products with the ease of someone who knew exactly how long 4 units would last in a person with a hole in the wrong place. She called out doses and drugs without checking sheets. Tranexamic acid 1 gram now. Start massive transfusion protocol. Type O negative until the lab catches up. Between patients, she washed her gloves with saline when the blood obscured her ability to feel. The red water ran down into the drains, pink and swirling. Nora stayed at her shoulder like a shadow. She handed instruments before Lena asked for them. A clamp at the right angle. The exact suture needed. A fresh scalpel when the first dulled on too many layers of tissue. Once between cases, Nora caught Lena's forearm. Their eyes met. "You have done this before," Nora said. It was not a question. Lena did not answer. There was no space inside her chest for anything that was not the next move. She moved like the only calm thing in a frame filled with motion. To the residents and nurses around her, she seemed almost impossibly fast. To her, the world had slowed just enough that she could step into the gaps. At some point, the overhead page announced that the bridge was now stable enough for rescue crews to work without fear of further collapse. That did not change the work in the ER. The wave had already hit them. They were busy surviving the splash. She lost track of how many times she heard her name. "Dr. Hart over here. Hart, we are losing the line. Lena, look at this." She was not supposed to be everywhere at once, but the room had decided that she was. In the corner of her awareness, she noticed that Mercer had stopped barking orders and started following them. He covered a laceration deep enough to show tendon. He wrote notes. His eyes, when they flicked to the governor and trauma, one were sharp with something that was not admiration and not yet fear. Her hands ached. Her shoulders burned. Once, when she paused to push hair back from her face with her wrist, the world tilted a little at the edges. She ignored it. A teenage girl with a neck brace cried silently as Lena checked her spine one vertebra at a time. A man in his 60s with soot in the lines of his face gripped Lena's wrist while she stitched his forehead saying "thank you" every time the needle went in. The hum of the hospital never stopped. It deepened, then lightened, then settled. The alarm slowly shifted from crisis tones to monitoring tones. The shouts softened into normal raised voices. Someone brought coffee into the nurses' station. No one touched it. At some point, paramedics stopped coming through the doors. The last ambulance load had been triaged and sorted. The patients already inside were stabilized or on their way upstairs. The hallway no longer looked like a flood. It looked like the tail of a storm. The clock on the wall over the nurses' station read 13:15. The hands looked strangely small. Lena stood at the head of a bay that had not held anyone an hour before and now held a man whose scalp had been peeled back to bone. The edges of the wound flapped like a loose cap each time he moved his eyebrows. She worked in a steady, careful rhythm, opposing the skin lining up the hair follicles so the scar would hide in the future. "Last one," Nora said softly, not as a grand statement, just as an acknowledgement. "For now." Lena tied the final knot and cut the ends short. She smoothed the line of stitches with a gloved fingertip, adjusting one place where the skin puckered. The man's breathing evened. The sedative had taken hold. She set the needle holder down on the metal tray. The sound of the metal touching metal was a small, neat click. Only then did she step back. Her arms felt heavier than they had an hour before. The adrenaline that had carried her began to burn low. A tremor chased along her fingers, not enough to be seen unless someone looked carefully. She looked around. Every bed that had held a critical patient still held a living body. Monitors showed numbers that, while not perfect, no longer screamed. Nurses moved with the normal briskness of people doing hard jobs, not the frantic scramble of people trying to outrun time. In trauma, one Governor Ward lay with his eyes closed, a ventilator breathing for him in steady sighs. His abdomen was packed and covered. The improvised clamp had been replaced with a proper one. The line of Lena's repair lay hidden in the shadowed cave around his great veins, still incompetent. The burned woman in Bay 2 slept under a light sedation, the tube in her neck secured with neat ties. The boy whose heart had been squeezed too tight slept in a pediatric bed, his chest rising and falling in a quiet rhythm. A nurse sat near him, charting, one hand resting on the rail. Around the ER, people were beginning to notice that they had made it through something. Conversation shifted from commands to questions. "How many did we get?" 13 critical, all alive so far." "I did not think that kid in Bay 5 was going to make it." Lena stood in the center of it and felt the hum of the building again, the same note it had held in the morning, now layered with the memory of alarms. A smear of dried blood marred the side of her cheek, drawn there by an unthinking itch, scratched with a dirty glove. Her coat was no longer loose and clean. It clung heavy to her, stiff with fluid. She became aware of eyes on her. Nora, Jonah, a respiratory therapist whose name she had not had time to learn. 2 med students who had watched from the edges, holding pressure where they were told. Even some of the paramedics who had stayed to rest leaned in the doorways and looked at her like they were not sure what they had seen. She could not read their expressions completely. Awe, confusion, a thin thread of unease. Her legs sent up a complaint, her knees felt locked. She let herself exhale long and slow, the breath shaking a little on the way out. Nora stepped closer and put a hand on her shoulder. The pressure was firm grounding. "You need to wash," Nora said quietly, "and probably sit down before your body notices what you put it through." Lena nodded. For the first time since she had dropped the clipboard, she allowed herself to think of leaving the center of the room. The idea of hot water and a door that shut between her and the noise suddenly seemed very far away and very necessary. She peeled off her gloves. They came away with a soft, sticky sound turned inside out and dripping at the fingertips. She dropped them into the red bin. Her hands underneath were pale and wrinkled, the creases filled with faint red shadows that the sink would take time to erase. They did not shake when she held them up, not yet. She turned toward the staff corridor, the hum at her back, and walked. The staff corridor felt quieter, but only by comparison. The overhead lights buzzed. Someone had left a cart half blocking the way, an abandoned island of used linen and empty IV bags. A faint trail of bloody shoe prints led from the ER door toward the bank of elevators. Lena walked past the break room. Through the narrow window, she saw 3 nurses standing motionless around a table, paper cups of coffee cooling in their hands. Their mouths moved, but she could not hear the words. The television in the corner still showed the bridge smoke, now thinner. The caption changed to, "Rescue operations continue." Her boots stuck slightly to the floor with each step and let go with a faint pull. Outside the locker room, the hum of the building seemed to pool a steady background vibration. The small rectangular window in the door showed a slice of tiled wall and the edge of a bench. She pressed the bar, went inside, and let the door close behind her. The locker room was empty. Rows of narrow metal doors, a bank of sinks with spotted mirrors, a bench running the length of the room. It smelled of deodorant detergent and the ghost of someone else's perfume. She stopped at the sink first. For a moment, she did not recognize the person in the mirror. The woman looking back at her had a streak of dried brown red along one cheek, a smear across her forehead, and a fine spray of tiny dots along her jaw. Her hair clung damply to her temples. Her eyes were too bright in a face that had lost color. She turned on the tap. The pipe shuddered before the water came. It ran brown for half a second, then cleared to a harsh chlorinated stream. She cupped her hands and splashed her face. The water was colder than she expected. It shocked the skin, drove a shiver down her spine. Dried blood softened and broke free, spiraling down the drain in pale red swirls. She scrubbed at the line on her cheekbone with the heel of her hand until the skin burned. Her fingers trembled now, the delayed shake arriving at last. Not much, just enough to ripple the water spilling out of her palms. She closed her eyes and focused on the sound of the tap, the simple hiss. She breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth. "You are here. Sink, mirror, light." Not canvas, not dust, not rotor noise. The hum of the building threaded through the sound of the water, a low note under a higher hiss. She shut off the tap. Drops clung to her eyelashes and fell in tiny cold shocks as she crossed to her locker. She spun the dial without looking at it, fingers finding the numbers by habit. The lock clicked open. Inside, her life had been folded into a small organized space. On the top shelf, a fresh set of scrubs, a rolled hoodie, a paperback thriller with the first few chapters dog-eared, a small bottle of unscented soap. On the lower shelf, the backpack, plain black canvas. No logo, no personal keychains. The fabric was worn where it had rubbed against her shoulder on long walks. The zippers were wrapped in black tape, the metal heads cushioned so they would not tap together. She put her hand on it. The canvas felt familiar under her fingers, rough in the same spots it had always been. In the ER, the world had not asked who she was. It had only asked what she could do. Here, in front of this open rectangle of metal, the question came back. She lifted the bag out and set it on the bench. The weight of it was constant. Cash, clothes, paper, plastic, a life in ready pieces. She unzipped the main compartment a few inches and saw the corner of a passport cover. The name printed on that document did not match the badge clipped to her coat. The face inside was hers. The haircut was different. The corners of her mouth pulled tight for a moment. She could not say whether it was a grimace or something close to a smile. Her fingers tightened on the zipper. She swung the bag fully open. Quick inventory without taking anything out. Bills folded and banded. A small roll of medical tape. A phone with no contacts. A compact flashlight wrapped in cloth so it would not rattle. The edge of a folded photocopy of a map with highways marked in highlighter. Leave. The thought came as clean and simple as a command. She could walk out of the hospital, down the concrete steps, at the side entrance, past the smokers who always seemed to be there, and keep going until the building disappeared behind her. Her heart, which had calmed in the cool quiet, gave one hard thump. In the mirror across the room, she saw herself bending over the bench hands on the backpack. For a second, the reflection doubled. Behind her in her mind's eye, she saw herself as she had been in the tent. Same hands, different clothes. They did not let you go, the memory whispered. She zipped the bag this time all the way. The sound of the teeth meshing echoed more loudly in the empty room than it should have. She set the pack upright on the bench next to her. Her hand rested on the top handle. She needed out, not just from the ER, from this building, from this name. The hum of the hospital vibrated faintly through the soles of her shoes. In trauma, one Colin Mercer stood at the governor's bedside. He had scrubbed out once the vascular surgeon took over late to his own operation. Now, with the crisis past and the governor bandaged and sedated, he had drifted back, drawn by a curiosity he would not have named. The others had stepped away. The suits had gone to make calls. Nora was in Bay 2, checking the burned woman's airway and adjusting sedation. Mercer pulled the sheet down just enough to see the lower edge of the abdominal dressing. Beneath that deeper, more hidden, was the place that bothered him. He had caught a glimpse during the brief time between the clamp coming off and the cavity being packed. It had been quick, but his mind had taken a snapshot. He glanced around to make sure no one watched him, then lifted a corner of the drape, exposing a small portion of the surgical field where a bit of packing and tubing emerged. He was not looking for something obvious. He was looking for the echo of a pattern. He saw it in the way the suture line disappeared under the pack. The spacing, the angle of the bites. What little he could see was too regular, too even to be accidental. Most surgeons at St. Gabriel used interrupted stitches for that kind of repair. Safe, standard, easy to adjust if something looked wrong. This was not that. This was a continuous run, each loop locking the next. It looked almost like a braid. He remembered a conference in Washington 3 years earlier in a hotel ballroom that smelled of coffee and new carpet. Late in the day, when most people had started checking their phones, instead of the slides, a colonel from the Army Medical Corps had taken the podium. No cameras, no recording. The door had closed. The talk had been flagged for restricted clearance. Mercer had been invited in because he liked being invited to things other people could not see. The colonel had shown grainy pictures of field repairs, limbs saved in dirt and dust, vessels pieced together under conditions that would have made any civilian surgeon blanch. He had talked about an unnamed program, an effort to build a team of surgical assets for forward deployment. On one slide, a close-up of a vein repair had held the room. The suture pattern was unlike anything Mercer had seen before, dense but not strangling, fast to apply according to the speaker and strong under strain. A shadowed figure had appeared in the corner of one frame. Only the forearms and hands were visible, scars, long fingers, no identifying marks beyond that. The colonel had called that surgeon by a code name that sounded more like an object than a person. A thread, a weave, something like that. Mercer let the drape fall back into place. He straightened and walked out of the bay, pulling off his cap as he went. His hair, though mussed, still fell mostly into place. At the nurse's station, a phone sat unused in its cradle. He picked it up and dialed a number he had not used in a long time. It rang 4 times before a man's voice answered, clipped and neutral. Federal Credentialing Office. "This is Dr. Colin Mercer at St. Gabriel Medical Center in Philadelphia," Mercer said. He kept his tone brisk professional. "I need a verification run on a physician credential flagged for inconsistency." "Name," the man on the other end said. "Dr. Lena Hart," Mercer said. His gaze slid down the hall toward the staff corridor and the lockers beyond. "Preliminary surgical intern, transfer from an offshore school." There was a pause. "Reason for concern?" the voice asked. Mercer considered his words. "Her file does not match her performance," he said. "Either she is a fraud or something else entirely. I would appreciate a biometric check run against Department of Defense databases, quietly." The pause this time stretched longer. "I will see what we can do," the man said at last. "If there is a hit, someone will contact you." Mercer hung up before the uneasy feeling in his gut could climb any higher. He told himself he was protecting the hospital, protecting himself, making sure no one could say he had ignored a potential problem. Back in the locker room, Lena slipped her arms out of her stained coat. The fabric resisted drying blood, making it cling. She peeled it off and let it drop onto the bench for now. Underneath her scrub top was splattered 2 patches of brown and dark red spreading across the blue. She undid the tape at the cuffs of her gloves, rolled them off, and dropped them into the bin by the door. Her bare hands looked thinner without the latex, the bones more visible. She turned them palm up. Thin white lines crossed the skin near the base of her fingers at the crook of her thumbs on the inside of her wrists. Some were straight, some curved. They formed no pattern that anyone else would recognize. She knew where each had come from. Knife slips, wire saw burns, bits of shrapnel dug out on quiet days. She closed her hands into fists, then opened them again. The tremor was still there, a faint vibration that echoed the hum in the walls. "You broke cover," she said softly to the empty room. The words tasted strange in English. "You knew better." "You also kept them alive," another part of her answered. She did not say that part out loud. She sat on the bench, the backpack beside her. For the first time since dawn, she let her weight rest fully on something solid. Her body protested. Her lower back ached. Her thighs felt heavy. A wave of exhaustion that had been waiting at the edge of her awareness rolled in thick and dull. She closed her eyes just for a moment. The hum of the hospital swelled and fell like a breath drawn in and let out. The locker room door banged open. Metal hit the stopper with a hollow smack that ricocheted off tile and metal and sank into Lena's chest. Her eyes snapped open. A man filled the doorway. Not in height alone, though he was tall, but in presence. Dark windbreaker, the yellow letters on the chest half hidden by the angle. Tactical vest underneath. Holstered pistol at his hip. A badge clipped to the front of his belt caught the fluorescent light and threw it back in a dull flare. Two other figures loomed behind him in the hall, guns held low, bodies tight. The hum of the building did not change, but the air inside the room felt suddenly thinner. "Do not move," the man said. His voice was not loud. It did not have to be. It carried the practiced weight of someone used to being obeyed. Lena stayed seated on the bench. Her hands rested on her thighs, fingers splayed to keep them flat. The backpack sat upright beside her, a silent confession. Her heart rate tamped down by exhaustion and medication spiked. He stepped in, letting the door swing shut behind him. The other agents stayed in the hallway, visible through the narrow glass. Their eyes swept the corridor outside, checking angles Lena already knew. He did not raise his weapon. He kept his hand on its thumb, hooked over the safety strap, a habit more than a threat. "Dr. Lena Hart, alone." "Or," he said, "I presume." She tilted her head a fraction enough to meet his eyes. They were gray and lined at the corners, the eyes of a man who had spent too much time looking at screens in dark rooms and through scopes in bright ones. "I am just a resident," she said. Her voice sounded hoarse, the words catching in a throat that had shouted over alarms. He looked at the backpack, at the blood on her scrubs, at the open locker. "If that were true," he said, "we would not be having this conversation." He took 2 more steps into the room, kicking the doorstop with the edge of his boot to keep the door from closing fully. It stayed open a few inches, a wedge of hallway visible. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called over his shoulder to the agents outside, tone dry, "we have our ghost." One of them exhaled a soft curse. He looked back at Lena. "Special Agent Sam Riker," he said. He tapped his badge with 2 fingers, a small perfunctory gesture. "Federal Bureau of Investigation attached to a joint task force with people who never put their names on paper." She did not answer. For a second, the room held nothing but the buzz of the light and the faraway murmur of the ER dulled by closed doors and distance. "We got a facial hit from the air cameras," Riker said. "Run through the usual hospital staff databases. Nothing special. One of those flagged a secondary protocol and sent the image uphill." Lena watched his mouth as he spoke. The rhythm of his words was measured like someone laying out a case in court. "Up there," he continued, nodding slightly toward the ceiling, "your face landed in a file that has not been opened in a while. A very dusty, very red stamped file." He paused. "It has you listed as killed in action," he said. "Al-Qatar 4 years ago. Field hospital hit by a drone. Tent turned into confetti. They found teeth, dog tags, blood, enough for a death certificate." His gaze dropped briefly to her hands, then returned to her face. "They did not find those hands," he said. He said. Her fingers twitched on her thighs before she stilled them. His eyes caught the movement. "We have been looking for you for 5 years," he said. "Off and on, when budgets allowed, when someone upstairs remembered that there was once a person who could tie off a bleeding vessel in under a minute while mortar rounds landed close enough to shake the table." He nodded toward the door, toward the ear beyond. "Seems we did not need to look that hard, UCC yet. You came to us. You just could not help yourself." "I saved their lives," Lena said. It came out flatter than she expected. There was no triumph in it, just a statement. "I know," Riker said. "That is the problem." He took another step, closing the distance between them to a few yards. His boots made dull sounds on the tile. "Whatever they did to you," he said, "whatever they taught you, they carved something into your wiring. You see a bleed, you stop it. You see a collapse, you brace it. Even if it means throwing away the quiet little identity you built." Her jaw tightened. "Who reported me?" she asked. Riker's mouth quirked not quite into a smile. "A doctor named Mercer made a professional inquiry, and he said." He did not know what door he was knocking on. He just wanted to make sure his hospital was not liable if a fake doctor was playing hero. Lena looked down for a moment at the bench between her shoes. The metal edge left a faint line on the back of her calves, He thought he was protecting himself, Riker added. He handed us a flare without even realizing it. She did not give him the satisfaction of a reaction. He watched her a moment longer, reading something in the set of her shoulders, in the way she did not fold. You have been living as Lena Hart for 3 years, he said. Before that, you were K-12. Before that, something else. Before that, maybe just a kid. He lifted his chin. Today in the system that matters, you are Subject 12 of Project Lattice, he said. Asset class surgical, status updated from presumed KIA to located viable actionable. The program's name scraped along old pathways in her mind. The syllables tasted like antiseptic and dust. I am not an asset, she said. The words came out quiet, but each one had edges. Riker exhaled through his nose. Your paperwork disagrees, he said. I have seen it multiple times. You are listed under strategic resources, not personnel. They do not do funerals for resources, by the way. They close files. He leaned his hip against the bank of the lockers across from her, the stance casual, the set of his shoulders anything but. The world is changing again, he said. He said. Bridge collapses are on the news. Other things do not make it that far. The people who ran Lattice dusted off their binders last month. They wanted to know if any of their ghosts were still walking. He gestured at her with his chin. They will be very pleased to hear that you are alive. A fatigue that had nothing to do with blood loss or standing too long seeped into her bones. I am a doctor, Kisi, Lena said. Here now, that is what I am. You are a doctor in the same way a rifle is a paperweight when you use it to hold down a stack of documents, Riker said. Function is function. The fact that you saved a sitting governor and 12 others today is going to look very good on certain slides. I will not go back, she said. Riker studied her for a long moment. The lines at the sides of his eyes deepened. You do not have much say, he said, and his voice was softer now, almost regretful. Your last choice in this matter was when you signed the papers and let them cut into your head and your life and build you into what you are. I did not sign, she said. He nodded once, as if that detail did not surprise him. We are not here to arrest you for practicing medicine without proper bedside manner, he said. We are here to extract you. There is a helicopter on the roof, fueled and waiting. There is a file in D.C. with a list of names, most of them crossed out. Yours just went from black to blue. He straightened away from the lockers. You can walk out with us, or you can make this loud, he said. Loud will end the same way, just with more paperwork. I do not recommend it. People might get hurt on the way. Her eyes flicked to the door. The gap showed a sliver of hallway, a bit of beige paint, one of the agents outside shifting his weight. The vent above the door rattled softly as air moved through. Up her mind noted, too narrow, dynamics bad. She let her gaze drop back to Riker. If I refuse, she said, you drag me. If you refuse, I remind you that you are still technically government property, he said. And then I drag you. He did not say it with malice. It sounded like reciting a regulation. The hum in the walls pressed against her ears. In the ER, someone laughed for the first time since the code had been called. The sound did not quite reach the locker room. It felt distant and fragile. Can I wash? Lena said. Riker frowned. You have my people at the door, Mr. Riker, she added. You have the exit covered. You have the gun. I have blood on my face and still do not know which of it is mine. Let me wash before you parade me through my own hospital. The use of his name without title made him blink once. He followed her glance to the mirror, to the faint smear she had missed near her jawline, and the spatter along her neck. For a moment his mouth thinned. He looked older. We are on a schedule. One of the agents called from the hallway. Perimeter is going to get leaky once the press figures out what happened in there. Riker did not look back. Keep the door open, he said over his shoulder. If she tries to shut it, you step in. He returned his attention to Lena. Make it quick, he said. No surprises. She rose from the bench, leaving the backpack where it was. Standing sent a low wave of dizziness up the back of her skull. Her knees tightened to keep from showing it. She walked to the nearest sink. The mirror showed her Riker behind her, the open door the agent's shoulders. The fluorescent tube above flickered once. She turned the tap. Water rushed against porcelain loud in the small room. She cupped her hands, let the stream fill them, and raised the water to her face. The cold water cleared the last of the dried blood from her skin. It also made her feel every heartbeat. Lena let the stream run, eyes half-lidded. The mirror fogged at the edges where the humidity met the cool glass. Her fingers slid along the underside of the metal soap dispenser bolted to the wall. It was a heavy industrial piece, square corners softened by use, mounted with 2 thick screws through a backing plate. Years of cleaning had left the steel dull and mottled. Hands where I can see them, one of the agents called from the hall. Reflex, not real suspicion yet. Lena lifted her hands, palms open, water dripping from her fingers. Riker watched her reflection. He had seen the aftermath of her work in the ER. He had not seen her move. She lowered her hands, pressed the dispenser's button, let a neutral-smelling gel slide into her palm, rubbed it across her skin. The dried blood loosened in streaks and spirals and washed away. The hum in the wall seemed louder now, as if the building leaned in to listen. She rinsed her hands, then left them under the water a beat longer than necessary. Her fingertips mapped the shape of the dispenser again. There. A tiny gap between metal and tile where the mounting plate met the wall. The screws had been tightened hard, but grout had chipped with time. Riker shifted his weight behind her boots, scraping faintly on the tile. "You know," he said, conversational in spite of the setting, "there was an argument about whether we should even bother bringing a team. Some people thought you had either burned out or buried yourself too deep to do anything interesting. Those people did not watch the floor today," she said. Her voice sounded almost calm. He made a soft sound that might have been agreement. She cut the water. The sudden quiet made the hum stand out like a low chord. The fluorescent tube above the mirrors buzzed. She wiped her hands on a paper towel. The dispenser crinkled as she yanked a second sheet free and dabbed at the line along her jaw. In the mirror, her own eyes met hers. For a moment, someone else looked back. Not Lena, not the resident. The other one, the one who measured rooms and exits and the weight of objects. Improvise. The words surfaced in her mind in a voice she had not heard out loud in years. She crumpled the wet towel in her fist, reached out with her free hand and wrapped it around the metal housing of the soap dispenser. It would have been easier to just pull. That would have telegraphed the movement. She did something subtler. She twisted. She used her hips and shoulders together, not brute arm strength. The motion was tight, compact. Years of training poured into a single small act. The screws groaned, grout powdered. The backing plate gave a fraction of an inch. Riker saw her body shift. "Hey," he said. Too late. The dispenser tore free from the wall. White dust rained down. A chunk of tile snapped off with a sharp crack. She did not throw it at him. She threw it up. The metal blocks smashed into the fluorescent tube above the sinks. Glass exploded into glittering shards. The dazed tube died mid-hum. The light went out with a pop. For a heartbeat, the room plunged into darkness. The only glow came from the thin line of hallway and the faint green from the exit sign over the door. "Secure her," one of the agents barked. Riker lunged forward, hand reaching for her shoulder. Lena dropped. She let gravity fold her knees. She went not back, but sideways out of the direct line of his grab her body, remembering crowded spaces and panicked hands. His arm closed on air. She swept one leg out low, hooking his ankle in a quick arc. His weight was still coming forward. The combination did the rest. He hit the floor hard, tactical vest, thumping against tile. The gun in his hand stayed in his grip, his training holding even when his body did not, but the impact knocked the breath out of him. The agents in the hall raised their weapons. Flashlight beams cut into the dark room in bright, narrow cones. "Do not fire!" Riker forced out air, returning to his lungs in a rough gust. Too many pipes. Their beams found Lena for a second, caught in the middle of the locker room, crouched low. Her eyes flashed pale in the light, then disappeared as she rolled behind the bench. The backpack stayed where it was. She did not reach for it. Plans were for people with more time. She scrambled up the metal fronts of the locker's feet, finding the narrow lips of the vents near the bottom, hands gripping the tops. Sheet metal rattled under her weight. One door popped open, slamming against its neighbor with a hollow bang. "She's going up," one of the agents shouted. The ceiling was a grid of acoustic tiles held in thin metal rails. She slapped one with her palm, shoved it aside. Dust rained down dry and chalky, coating her hair and shoulders. Cool air breathed from the dark space above. She hauled herself up, ribs scraping the edge of the opening. Her shoulders complained. Her knees slammed into the frame. She did not stop. Her palms found metal struts and insulation stiff with age. A hand grabbed her ankle. She kicked. Her heel connected with a wrist. Fingers slipped. She wriggled the rest of the way through and rolled onto the narrow metal framing that held the tiles. Below, the locker room snapped back into partial view through the gap. Flashlight beams speared upward. Riker's face appeared for a second, gray eyes sharp. "She is in the ceiling, Coco," he called. The echo bounced down the hall. "Do not shoot. She is on the grid." Lena flattened herself along the beam, distributing her weight. The space stank of dust and old air, the insulation smelling faintly of fiberglass and mildew. The hum up here was louder, closer to the source. Wires hummed and pipes vibrated with the life of the building. She belly crawled. She did not have to think about the route. Supply B3 earlier had etched the schematic into her mind. Now she followed it in reverse, counting crossbeams and drop points. Above the break room. Above a stairwell. The metal creaked as she shifted her weight past a duct that rattled. Voices trailed under her, distant and scattered. Someone below shouted, "She went that way." Footsteps pounded on the floor, no clear pattern. Sweat ran into her eyes. Dust stuck to her cheeks, mud made of the hospital's skin. She reached a junction where the framing ran along a larger shaft. A square access panel sat in the middle of it, fixed with a simple latch. A marker label on the side read, "Laundry Chute 2A." She popped the latch with one finger and pushed the panel up. Warm, damp air gusted out. The smell of detergent and wet cotton rose to meet her. Far below, metal clanged faintly. Carts rolled. Someone whistled a few notes off key. She looked down. The chute dropped 3 floors. Light from a lower opening turned the shaft into a vertical tunnel walls, slick sides smudged where fabric had brushed on its way past. At the bottom, a pile of linen filled a cart, blues and whites and pale greens. It was not the worst landing she had faced. She turned onto her back, swung her legs over the edge, and slid feet first into the narrow space. The metal brushed her shoulders. Static tugged at her hair. For a second she hung there, fingers gripping the edge above knees bent. Then she let go. The fall was not long enough to think in. Air hissed past her ears. The chute walls rushed by as blurred stripes. She hit the pile of linen in the cart with a heavy whump. The impact punched a breath out of her lungs. The cart squealed and rolled a few inches, wheels protesting the sudden weight. She lay there staring up at the square of light high above, feeling fabric settle around her. One of the sheets slithered over her face, smelling of bleach and something floral. She pushed it aside, got her elbows under her, and sat up. The laundry room was large, and bright industrial washers lining one wall like squat white giants. The air was humid, thick with steam and the clean smell of soap. A single orderly stood with his back to her earbuds and loading scrubs into a machine. He had not heard her arrive. Her body felt like a map of bruises. Her knees throbbed, her ribs buzzed. There was no time to sit with it. She slid off the cart, landed barefoot. She had lost her shoes somewhere between lockers and chute, or they had been ripped off when she went down. The cold of the tile seeped into the thin skin of her soles. She grabbed a pair of clean pants and a hoodie from a folded stack on a rolling shelf. Sizes did not matter. She needed layers that looked nothing like a bloodstained set of scrubs. She pulled the hoodie on over her top, yanking the hood up to hide her hair. The orderly turned and jumped, dropping a handful of cloth. "Jesus," he said, tugging in earbud free. "You scared me. You cannot be in here. This is staff only." "I am staff," she said. Her voice came out rough. She bent, picked up the dropped scrubs, and put them back on the stack. "You have a door to the loading dock." He blinked at her eyes, flicking over the hood, the smudges of dust on her face. "Yeah," he said. "End of the hall. Why?" "Fire code," she said. "They might ask you about it later." He frowned, confused, but shrugged it off and turned back to his machine. She walked past him, bare feet silent on the tile, the hoodie sleeves too long over her hands. The door to the loading dock had a bar like the locker room. It opened to a rectangle of light and cold air. Outside, the concrete was damp. Trucks backed against raised platforms. The world smelled of exhaust and rain. She stepped out into it. Behind her, somewhere above St. Gabriel, tightened its grip. Within 20 minutes, the hospital was on lockdown. Police cars lined the approach light bars, spinning red and blue. Yellow tape cordoned off entrances. Cameras clustered at the front like metal birds. Reporters spoke into microphones while tired security guards tried to keep them from crossing invisible lines. On the roof, the helicopter Riker had mentioned sat with its blade still, a crewman leaning against the open-door headset around his neck. His gaze kept flicking toward the stairwell door that had not opened yet. Inside, Riker moved through the recovery area with less grace than he would have liked. His ribs hurt where he had hit the floor. His wrist throbbed where her heel had connected. His pride was bruised more than either. Sweat dried cold between his shoulder blades. He pushed through a curtain into the room where Governor Ward lay. Monitors beeped in slow, even patterns. The governor's face was slack tube taped in place at his mouth, chest rising with each ventilator puff. Nora stood on the far side of the bed, adjusting a drip. 2 younger agents kept their weapons holstered, but their hands near. "She came this way," one of them said to Riker. He held up a small device. "We pinged the phone we found in her locker. Signal bled out near this room." "Her phone," Nora said, looking up. Her expression was controlled, but irritation flashed across it. "Not her." She pointed at the small bedside table. Riker stepped closer. A cheap smartphone lay there, screen dark, a red notification light, blinking at a slow, steady interval. Next to it sat a folded napkin from the hospital cafeteria, the logo smeared at one corner. He picked up the napkin. 3 short lines of handwriting curved across it in blue ink. "Dr. Mercer," it read. "Check your suture on bed, 4 in an hour, vertical mattress, do not screw it up." The letters were sharp and compact. No loops where there did not need to be loops. Riker's jaw worked once. She had time to leave you a note, one of the agents scoffed. She is taunting us. Nora shook her head. She's making sure a patient does not bleed, she said. Everything else is secondary. Riker folded the napkin once and slipped it into his pocket. He crossed to the window at the far end of the room. The blinds hung crooked. Someone had pushed them aside in a hurry. The glass pane beyond stood open 2 inches at the bottom, letting in a slice of cool air. The curtain moved with it a slow, restless sway. 3 stories down the flat roof of the parking garage collected puddles and shallow dips. Beyond that, a chain-link fence marked the edge of the hospital property. An alley ran along it, disappearing between 2 brick buildings. She went out here, one of the agents said. Riker nodded. His ribs protested the movement. She is barefoot, the agent added. She cannot have gone far. Riker did not answer right away. His eyes followed the line from window to roof to fence, imagining hands on rough concrete, the catch of chain link on skin. He could feel the city stretching out beyond the alley. Streets and side streets, bus stops, crowds. She has a head start and a change of clothes, he said finally. She has dropped anything that pings. She knows our playbook. He shut the window with a firm push. The latch clicked into place. The curtain fell still. He looked back at the governor at the line of dressing that hid the repair he had not made. She's gone, he said. The bus smelled like diesel old fabric and the sugar of spilled soda that had seeped into the floor and never quite left. Greyhound logos peeled at the corners on the windows. Overhead lights hummed faintly brighter at the front dimmer toward the back. The air conditioning rattled along the ceiling, blowing cool air that carried the tired breath of 40 people. Lena sat in the last row right by the window. The hoodie she had taken from the hospital laundry swallowed her shoulders. The sleeves covered her wrists and most of her hands when she let them. The drawstring hung untied. The hood cast a soft shadow over the upper half of her face. Her new pants were a size too big, cinched with a piece of twine she had found looped around a stack of laundry bags. The canvas sneakers on her feet came from a cardboard box near a shelter downtown traded for 2 folded bills she had kept tucked behind her hospital ID emergency cash she had always carried on her body, not in the pack. The backpack stayed in the locker where she had dropped it. Her ticket sat in the pocket of the hoodie, paper soft from being folded and unfolded. One way, no name printed on it, just a destination and a departure time. The driver had barely glanced at her when he took it, more interested in the line behind her and keeping on schedule. She rested her forehead against the cool glass. Outside Philadelphia slid past in smears of light and shadow. Street lamps cast cones of yellow on sidewalks. Traffic lights flicked from red to green to yellow over intersections where cars waited nose to nose. People moved on the sidewalks in small clusters, shoulders hunched against the night air, each wrapped in their own orbit. St. Gabriel rose for a moment at the top of a hill, a pale block of concrete and glass. The illuminated cross on its highest wall glowed a dull white softened by distance and haze. From here, the building looked smaller. One wing still showed signs of what the day had been. Extra lights on in the emergency department windows. A cluster of vehicles near the entrance police cars and news vans mingled. Little blinking dots that meant cameras questioned statements. Lena watched it all recede. The bus engine growled as the driver shifted gears, merging onto the highway ramp. The vibration traveled up through the floor into her shoes along her calves. It sat in her knees and hip bones, a constant low tremor that reminded her of rotors and armored convoys in the belly of cargo planes. She let it settle. It was a familiar kind of noise. She could live with familiar. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers interlaced loosely. The thin scars along her palms and fingers had gathered dust in the chute and sweat in the run through the city. They stood out a little lighter than the skin around them. She turned her right hand palm up and traced one of the white lines with the thumb of her left. It curved from the base of her index finger toward the center of her palm, a tiny crescent. The number 13 drifted through her head unbidden. 13 critical. 13 still breathing when she walked out. She had not counted in the middle of the work. Counting came later in the quiet between movements. The nurses and residents would put the numbers into charts and reports. Someone would read them in a meeting and call it a success. For her, it sat as a simple fact. She had walked into the ER in the morning, pretending to be someone who could not be trusted with a simple potassium correction. She had walked out in the afternoon, leaving behind a trail of bodies that were still alive because she had stopped acting. The engine's hum deepened as the bus picked up speed. The city lights thinned. Billboards replaced small shops outside the window. Gas stations and fast food signs bloomed in neon at the edges of dark stretches. A baby cried 2 rows ahead, then quieted. Someone behind her sniffed the wet hitch of a cold. A man near the middle aisle snored softly, head tipped back and mouth open just enough to catch flies. The interior lights dimmed a notch. The darkness outside pressed closer to the glass. Lena's reflection appeared faintly on the window. The ghost of her face floated over the blurred streaks of taillights, and the dark bulk of passing trucks. The hoodie shadowed her features, made her eyes look deeper. She lifted one hand and touched the glass. It was cold and slightly greasy. Her fingertips left faint smudges that caught the glow of every passing street lamp. In the reflection, her hand looked almost separate from her. The scars showed pale against the darkness, a small map of where she had been. She let her hand drop back to her lap and leaned into the seat. Her muscles throbbed as they unwound little pulses of delayed protest. Her shoulders ached where she had pulled the sheet tight around the construction worker's pelvis. Her knees remembered the floor of the ER and the edge of the laundry cart. Her ribs carried the echo of the impact down the chute. Her mind replayed moments without asking permission. The feel of the governor's vein under her fingers, hot and slick, shuddering under the clamp. The drag of the scalpel through burned tissue at the front of the woman's neck, the hiss of new air. The way the boy's monitor had changed when the pressure around his heart eased. Bits of sound surfaced. Nora's voice saying, "You have done this before." Not accusing, just seeing. Jonah's breathless, "I cannot see anything," turning into silence as he watched. The paramedic with the pale man murmuring, "Doc, he will be gone if we do not move now," as she pretended not to hear. The lie she had told that man sat heavier than the rest. Her eyes closed. Behind her lids, light flickered the sharp white of the ER, the orange of the tent, the red of blood where it did not belong. She inhaled through her nose, held it, then let it out slowly. The bus hummed around her. The seat vibrated gently under her spine. The sound of the engine folded into the same part of her brain that had always held the hospital's low buzz, a constant anchoring noise. She let her head tilt sideways until her temple rested against the window. The glass was cold against the bruised edge of her skull. Each bump in the road sent a small jolt through her bones. A highway sign flashed past its green face, washed pale by the bus headlights. The letters were too close and too quick to read. It did not matter, not in this moment. The important geography had already shifted. In the city behind her, someone would follow her path from the locker room to the ceiling panels. Someone would shake their head over the laundry chute. Someone would tell the story of the intern who had come in slow and quiet and walked out invisible. Colin Mercer would stand in front of a group of administrators and speak carefully about chain of command and unauthorized procedures. He might leave out the part where he froze. Sam Riker would sit at a desk and write a report about a lost asset found and then lost again, the words neat and constrained on the page. Governor Ward would, if everything held wake someday, with a line on his belly and another deep inside where he could not see it. He would be told the story in a way that made sense to the people who told it. Lena was not in any of those rooms. She was in the back of a bus, in a seat that smelled faintly of fabric cleaner and the ghosts of other travelers. Her hands were empty. Her bag and its carefully arranged contents sat in a metal box miles behind. She reached up and pulled the hood a little further forward, shading her eyes from the overhead light. Her body had begun to move past the adrenaline crash into a softer exhaustion, the kind that made shapes blur and edges soften. Her mind, which had been running hot for hours, finally found a cooler gear. Her hands lay palms down on her thighs, fingers relaxed. They had been tools, weapons, instruments. For the span of a day, they had been the difference between life and loss for 13 strangers and one governor. Now they were just hands resting. The bus rolled west along the dark ribbon of a highway engine humming. Outside, the lights of the hospital on the hill shrank until they were only one more cluster in the distance, then vanished entirely. Lena watched the darkness beyond the glass until her eyes grew heavy. For the first time since the floor shook under Supply B3, she let them close without fighting it. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.